Hello everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. High school has a way of making everything feel permanent. Every emotion feels like it will last forever. Every relationship feels like fate. Back then, I had a girlfriend who meant everything to me. We were inseparable, the kind of couple who sat too close in class, who stayed up too late on the phone, who believed the world outside our little bubble didn't matter. But our relationship wasn't light or simple. It carried weight. One night, during one of those long conversations that only happen when the world is quiet and honest, she told me something that changed everything. When she was younger, her stepfather had sexually abused her. She didn't tell many people. I could tell it took everything in her to say it out loud. She said it flatly at first, like it was just a fact. But I could see how much it cost her. I didn't know how to respond in a way that was big enough for what she'd been through. I was just a teenager. I couldn't undo anything. I couldn't fix the past. But I remember sitting there feeling this overwhelming need to protect her, not in a macho way, not in a fantasy hero way, just in a quiet, desperate way. I wanted her to feel safe with me in a way she never had before. After that night, I saw her differently. Not fragile, but layered. There was always something behind her smile that most people didn't see. One of her quirks, something that seemed harmless at first, was the way she talked in her sleep. She didn't mumble nonsense like most people. She spoke clearly, full sentences, and if you answered her, she would respond. It was like her brain built your voice into the dream. You could have an entire conversation with her while she was completely asleep. Usually, it was funny. She'd talk about school or random things, and the next day, I'd tease her about it. She'd laugh and tell me I was making it up. But knowing what I knew about her past, I always worried that one day the dreams would go somewhere darker. That day came on an ordinary afternoon. We were just hanging out in my room. The house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the window, filling the space with that warm, sleepy glow. We weren't doing anything important, watching TV, talking. Eventually, the quiet and the warmth pulled her into sleep. She looked peaceful, completely relaxed. It was one of those rare moments where she looked untouched by everything she carried. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Her breathing was steady. The room was silent except for the hum of the fan. Then I noticed the change. Her breathing grew shallow, faster. Her forehead tightened like she was concentrating on something difficult. She shifted uncomfortably, then she made a sound. It was soft, high-pitched, almost like a small whimper, the kind of sound you hear from someone trying not to cry. I leaned closer and whispered her name, thinking maybe she was just having a bad dream about something harmless. Then she said one word, "Help." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, terrified, like she was afraid someone might hear her. My chest tightened instantly. I'd had playful sleep conversations with her before, but this felt different, heavy. "What do you need help with?" I asked gently. "I'm right here." She paused. Then she began describing where she was. I'm in the kitchen," she said. She described the layout of her childhood home, the linoleum floor, the lighting, the hallway. And then she said, "He's here." She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. She said he was in his room down the hall, but that he wanted to play the game. The way she said the game made something in me go cold. It wasn't a game. It was what he had called the abuse, a twisted way to disguise something monstrous. She started making that small whining sound again, like a trapped animal. I felt helpless in a way I had never felt before. She wasn't just dreaming. She was reliving it. I leaned close to her ear and tried something instinctive. I tried to give her an exit. "Listen to me," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm outside. I'm right outside the back door. You can come to me. I have a car. We can leave. Just walk out." I don't know why I thought that would work. I think I just wanted to rewrite the memory, to give her the ending she never had. She went still for a second. Her eyes moved under her eyelids, like she was trying to place my voice in the dream. Then she shook her head slightly. "I can't," she whispered. "Why?" I asked, fighting the anger rising in my chest. "I'll get in trouble." The fear in her voice wasn't teenage fear. It was a child's fear, conditioned, deep, the kind that gets planted early and grows roots. "You won't get in trouble," I told her. "I won't let him hurt you, just run. I'm right there." She began hyperventilating. "He'll be mad," she said. "He'll hear me." Her hands clenched the sheets. Sweat formed on her forehead. Her body was reacting like it was happening in real time. That's when I realized something painful. I couldn't save her in the dream. The trauma wasn't a door she could just walk out of because I offered her an escape. It had built walls inside her, rules, fear, obedience tied to survival. The dream was a loop she couldn't break. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I gently shook her shoulder. "Hey, wake up. It's just a dream. Wake up." It took a few seconds. Then she gasped and her eyes flew open, wild, searching, disoriented. She looked around my room like she didn't recognize it. Then her eyes locked onto mine. The fear slowly drained, replaced by something heavier. I told her what happened, carefully, gently. I told her she had been talking, that she was back in the kitchen, that I tried to get her to come outside. Her face crumpled. She didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just broke. She buried her face in her hands and cried in a way I had never seen before, deep, from somewhere old. I held her for a long time. There were no heroic speeches, no solutions, just quiet. That afternoon changed me. It made me understand that trauma doesn't stay in the past. It doesn't expire. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in dreams. You can love someone deeply and still not be able to fight their ghosts for them. Sometimes love isn't about rescuing. Sometimes it's about sitting beside someone while they relive something you wish you could erase. I still think about that afternoon. The sunlight, the silence, the way her voice sounded when she said help. It taught me that some battles don't look dramatic. They happen quietly inside someone's mind, long after the world thinks everything is fine. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just stay. I stood there in the clearing, mud dripping from my fingers, trying to explain. The words came out wrong. I told her I had seen something like it once in a book, that I thought it was old, historical, interesting. I said I hadn't meant to hurt anything, that I didn't even know what it really was. But the air in the orchard felt thick, and my voice sounded small in it. Before I could finish, Serene turned and ran. She didn't hesitate. She didn't walk. She bolted back through the trees, her shawl lifting behind her like torn wings. It didn't look like she was running from me. It looked like she was running toward something. The coyotes, still sitting at the edge of the clearing, turned their heads in perfect unison and watched her go. Their eyes followed her the way you watch a signal flare. I took off after her. My boots slipped in the mud. Branches scraped my arms. I shouted her name, my voice cracking between childhood and something older. I yelled that I was sorry, that I didn't know. She didn't slow down. By the time I burst through the last row of trees and stumbled into the clearing, I was gasping for air. Serene was already on her knees in the mud. She had dropped right into it, not caring about her dress. Her hands clawed at the ground with frantic, desperate energy. She was crying, not quiet tears, but sharp, breaking sobs. Between them, she tried to hum that island lullaby she had taught me days earlier. The tune was fractured now, rising and falling without rhythm. The coyotes had followed at a distance. They sat at the edge of the clearing again, still and upright, like guards posted for something important. I didn't think. I dropped beside her and started digging. The mud was cold and heavy. It packed under my nails and tore the skin at my fingertips. We worked without speaking, ripping at the earth until the small pit I had made earlier reopened. My heart pounded so hard it made me dizzy. I didn't fully understand what we were fixing, but her fear had become my own. When the hole was deep enough, I grabbed the stone figurine from where it had fallen. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I placed it carefully into the hole, setting it upright. Serene let out a scream that sliced through the clearing. "No, no, no!" She lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers dug into my skin. She pulled the figurine back out and turned it in her trembling hands. "Like that," she whispered, her voice thick and breaking. "It must be like that." She shoved it back into the earth head first, upside down. The broken neck disappeared into the mud first. The rounded body pointed upward for a second before she pushed it down fully. She fell back onto the ground, rocking, covering her face with both hands. The humming started again, thin and desperate. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I scooped mud back into the hole and packed it down hard with both palms. I pressed until the surface looked flat again, though I knew it would never look untouched. When I finally looked up, the coyotes were gone. There was no sign of them at the tree line, no sound of them moving away, just empty space where they had been. Serene's crying softened into shaking breaths. After a while, she shifted closer to me. She wrapped her arms around me suddenly, her body thin and trembling. I froze at first, then leaned into her. We sat there in the damp clearing, two figures in the fading light. I tried to hum the tune with her. My voice was low and unsteady. For a moment, it felt like we were holding something back together. Then the orchard went still. The sound that followed didn't belong there. It began as a high, drawn-out scream from far away. Not human, mechanical, tires fighting pavement. A long, desperate shriek of rubber losing grip. It lasted just long enough to stretch tight across the evening. Then it stopped. That sudden silence felt worse than the scream, and then came the crash. It wasn't the sharp shatter of glass or the screech of metal scraping. It was heavy, solid, a deep, wet crunch that carried through the trees like a blow to the chest. Serene stopped humming instantly. She lifted her head toward the road. Her face changed again, but this time it wasn't rage. It was recognition. She stood up in one stiff movement and began running toward the house without a word. I followed her, fear rising fresh in my throat. We ran through the orchard rows, branches whipping our faces. The sky had darkened quickly. By the time we reached the edge of the lawn, the world felt different. Guests from the bed and breakfast were gathered in small clusters near the porch. My parents stood among them. Everyone was facing the road. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Across the street, black smoke climbed above the tree line. The car had left the road completely. It had jumped the shallow ditch and slammed into the old oak tree directly opposite the driveway. The tree had been there longer than anyone living could remember. It hadn't moved an inch. The car looked folded around it. Serene didn't go toward the guests. She moved straight to the staff near the kitchen entrance. She threw herself into the cook's arms, her body shaking again. He held her tightly, as if he had been expecting this. My parents found me and pulled me close. The flashing red and blue lights from the arriving police cruisers painted the house in bursts of color. The fire truck pulled halfway into the driveway to turn around. The mood shifted from curiosity to dread quickly. People began whispering, asking if anyone survived, if there were children. The owners of the house walked down the driveway to speak with the firefighters and EMTs. They talked in low tones for several minutes. When they came back, their faces were pale. They told everyone to go inside. They said the scene was bad, that it would be better if no one saw what was happening across the street. We were guided into the house. I didn't see Serene again that evening. She disappeared into the staff quarters. The emergency crews worked under harsh white floodlights for hours. I couldn't sleep. I drifted into the small bar area that faced the road and stood in the dark, watching. I saw the jaws of life bite into twisted metal. Sparks flew. Firefighters moved carefully, slowly. Eventually, they brought out a black body bag. Even from a distance, I could see the shape. It was bulky in the middle, and the top was wrong. Flat. Too flat. My stomach turned. I went back to where my parents were sitting. I told them about the coyotes. I admitted to taking the beers. They barely reacted. The accident had shaken them too much to care about my small rebellion. My dad even handed one of the beers back to me, saying it might calm my nerves. When the ambulances finally pulled away without lights or sirens, the silence that followed felt permanent. I was standing by the window when the cook entered the bar area. His face looked older than it had that morning. "Terrible thing," he said quietly, staring at the oak tree across the road. "Yeah," I answered. "There are many bad things in the orchard," he said after a moment. His eyes shifted toward me. "You understand why Serene is upset." I shook my head, though my chest felt hollow. "The spirits will be very angry now," he said. "Very angry." My throat tightened. "Tell her I'm sorry," I whispered. He studied me for a long moment. There was pity in his expression, but also something else, a warning. "The orchard is big," he said softly. "There are many curious things in it, but curious boys do not belong there." He left me alone with the dim light and the faint smell of smoke drifting through the open window. A few minutes later, the front door opened. The owners returned from speaking with the last firefighters. They looked shaken in a way that adults try to hide but can't. "What happened?" my dad asked. I turned slowly from the window. The image of the upside-down figurine pushed into the mud and the shape under the black body bag locked together in my mind with horrible clarity. I didn't think before I spoke. "A pregnant woman was beheaded and died in the crash," I said. My voice sounded distant, detached. The room went silent. Every adult turned to stare at me. My mother's friend took a step forward, her face drained of color. "How did you know?" she asked. For a moment, I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. Not really. I hadn't heard it from anyone. No one had said it yet. The firefighters had kept their distance. The body had been covered. And yet, the certainty sat in my chest, like a stone. I opened my mouth, but no explanation came. I could hardly hear the adults anymore, over the sound that had begun inside my head. It was faint at first, a low hum, the same broken lullaby, not from outside, from somewhere deeper. It was around 2020 or 2021 when everything felt paused because of the pandemic. The world had slowed down in a way none of us had experienced before. We were out of work like so many other people, and instead of staying inside and letting the days blur together, we decided to explore. We had recently moved from New Mexico to Washington, and the Pacific Northwest felt like another planet to us. The air was wetter, the forests were darker, the trees looked ancient, like they had been standing long before cities were built anywhere. We spent a lot of time in and around Port Angeles before taking longer drives across the Olympic Peninsula. The greenery felt endless. Moss covered everything, tree trunks, rocks, fallen logs. The forests didn't just look alive. They felt layered, almost breathing. We visited Quileute and stopped by Rosario Beach, where the water stretched out cold and gray under the sky. It was beautiful in a quiet way, peaceful but not soft. On our way south toward the Quinault Reservation, we pulled off the road into a small, secluded turnout tucked into the woods. We hadn't eaten, and the long drive was starting to wear on us. The spot looked harmless, just trees, ferns, and the smell of damp earth. We made sandwiches on the hood of the car and talked about the road ahead. My boyfriend is Quinault Cowlitz, so heading that direction always carries a different weight for him, something close to home, even if the specific places are new. By the time we finished eating, the light had shifted. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun had dipped low enough that the forest floor was already dim. The trees were thick, heavy with moss that glowed faintly in the golden light. It felt magical, inviting. We decided to take a short walk before getting back on the road, just to stretch our legs, just to step into the trees for a few minutes. At first, it was peaceful. The ground was soft under our shoes. Ferns brushed against our legs. But within minutes, the light faded faster than we expected. The canopy above was so dense that it swallowed what little daylight remained. The forest floor turned gray, then darker, and that's when the atmosphere changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no loud sound or sudden movement. It was a shift in pressure. The air felt heavier. My chest tightened in a way that didn't make sense. I remember thinking it was strange how quickly the warmth disappeared. It had been nearly 80 degrees earlier, and suddenly I felt cold enough to shiver. Then we noticed the ground. At first it looked solid, just layers of pine needles, leaves, and moss. But scattered across the area were subtle depressions, slight dips in the earth that didn't look natural. I didn't think much of it until my boyfriend took one normal step forward and vanished up to his thigh. The ground just gave out. 1 second he was beside me. The next, his leg had punched straight through the surface like he had stepped onto rotten wood. My heart jumped into my throat. I grabbed his arm immediately. He struggled, trying to pull himself free. As he shifted his weight, more of the earth collapsed around the hole. The surface wasn't soil. It was layers of decaying matter. Old wood, leaves, moss, forming a false floor over empty space. The hole widened, revealing a dark pit beneath us. Not shallow, not something you could casually climb out of if you fell fully in. We both froze for a second, staring at the unstable ground. The realization hit hard. We had been walking across something fragile, a surface that looked safe, but wasn't. We turned around and began carefully retracing our steps. Every movement felt calculated, every patch of moss suspicious. The eerie feeling I had earlier sharpened into something close to panic, and then the temperature dropped. Not gradually. It felt like someone opened a freezer door around us. My breath came out in visible white clouds. I started shaking uncontrollably. The warmth of the day was gone. Completely gone. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the dense canopy trapped cold air. Maybe the ground near the sinkholes held pockets of chill. But it didn't feel environmental. It felt sudden. We walked faster, trying to follow the same path back. We hadn't gone far, a couple 100 meters at most. We should have seen the road by then. We didn't. The forest looked identical in every direction. Mossy trunks, ferns, shadows. We stopped and checked our phones. No service. The map wouldn't load. The blue dot spun uselessly under a blank grid. That's when I realized we were lost. The fear shifted from discomfort to something deeper, something primal. Then we heard it. Rustling. Not the light skittering of small animals, not wind brushing leaves. It sounded heavier, measured, deliberate. I asked him quietly if he heard it. He nodded. That nod unsettled me more than the sound itself. We kept moving. I stayed as close to him as possible, almost stepping on his heels. I focused on the ground to avoid another collapse, but every few steps I glanced up, and that's when I saw them. White shapes, not bright, not glowing, just pale against the darkness, moving between trees, lingering at the edges of our vision. I blinked, telling myself it was fear. That low light plays tricks on the eyes, that shadows shift when you move, but the shapes didn't feel random, they felt aware. I squeezed his hand and asked if he saw it too. He didn't hesitate. Yes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't try to calm me with explanations. He just held my hand tighter and said he could see a clearing ahead. We needed to get there. We pushed forward, ignoring the rustling, ignoring the movement at the edges of our light. The forest felt like it was closing around us, watching. When we finally burst into a clearing, it felt abrupt, jarring. Excavators, heavy machinery, a construction site. We stared at it in confusion. How had we reached that? We hadn't seen any dirt roads, no tire tracks, no breaks in the forest, but beyond the clearing we saw it. The paved road, our road. We walked fast, not running now, but urgent. When we reached the car and locked the doors, the relief hit like a wave. My hands were shaking too hard to steady. Once we had service again, I pulled up the map. My stomach dropped. We were nearly a kilometer from where we had parked. That wasn't possible. We had walked maybe a few minutes before he fell into the sinkhole. We had turned around almost immediately. Between our starting point and the construction site, the map showed multiple dirt logging roads, wide enough to drive trucks through. Roads we would have had to cross. We hadn't crossed anything. We had walked through continuous forest. No breaks, no clearings. It was like the terrain had folded in on itself. We drove away in silence. The woods disappeared behind us, but the feeling stayed. The next morning, when sunlight made everything feel normal again, I asked him what he had really seen. He hesitated. Then he told me. He said there weren't just vague shapes. There were 2 or 3 white, hazy humanoid figures moving from tree to tree, keeping pace with us, staying just beyond direct view. He said they weren't solid. They looked blurred like outlines without detail. But their shape was unmistakably human. And he heard something else, a sound, not rustling, not animal calls, a high-pitched, rapid vocalization, almost like someone saying, ah, ah, yeah, quickly and repeatedly, semi-feminine, soft but persistent. He tried to mimic it for me. The sound made my skin crawl. While I had been focused on not falling into another pit, he had been aware that we weren't just lost. We were being followed. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. I trust him. I know he would protect us if he could. But how do you protect yourself from something you can't define? Something that moves without breaking branches, that watches without stepping into the light, that exists in the moss and the hollow spaces beneath your feet. I looked up sinkholes in Washington afterward. There wasn't much information, nothing that matched what we experienced exactly. False forest floors do happen in old growth, but not like that. Not in that pattern, not in a way that felt so intentional. It was one of the most beautiful trips we've ever taken, but that night in the woods changed something in me. Now, whenever I step under a dense canopy and the temperature shifts too fast, or the air feels too heavy, I remember the feeling of the ground giving way. I remember the white shapes between the trees. And I remember that sometimes the forest doesn't just surround you. Sometimes it notices you back. It was just another blazing afternoon in the Mojave when I left 29 Palms, headed for Albuquerque. I was stationed at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, and if you've ever been out there, you know it feels like the edge of the world. Endless brown desert, heat shimmering off the asphalt, nothing but rock, dust, and sky. I'd made the drive to the interstate plenty of times, but that day I decided to take the shortcut, a lonely 2-lane road cutting through absolute emptiness, partly to shave time, partly to win a bet. The only real landmark along that route is Amboy, a near-abandoned relic on old Route 66. It sits in a basin that feels like it's been drained of life. A dormant volcano looms nearby. Black lava fields stretch out on one side, white salt flats on the other. The famous Roy's Motel and Cafe sign rises like a skeleton against the sky. There were always rumors about Amboy, cult activity, strange gatherings, satanic rituals in the desert night. Probably barracks folklore. But when you're alone out there, stories feel less like jokes. I stopped briefly to snap a photo of the sign, just proof I'd done it. The silence was oppressive. No wind, no cars, no voices. The abandoned buildings felt like they were watching. I didn't linger. Once I left the salt flats behind, the road climbed toward a mountain pass before dropping into a canyon. The landscape changed. High, dry grass grew thick on both sides of the pavement, tall enough to block my view beyond a few feet. It created a tunnel effect, claustrophobic, limiting. I was cruising along when I saw something ahead. At first, it looked like heat distortion. Then shapes began to resolve. A car was blocking the road. It was parked sideways, perfectly perpendicular to the asphalt, blocking both lanes. A bright red Pontiac Fiero, the only color in miles of muted desert tones. As I slowed, more details came into focus. A suitcase lay open in the road. Clothes were scattered everywhere, as if thrown, and two bodies, a man and a woman, lying face down on the pavement, motionless. I stopped about 100 feet away. The engine idled softly. The canyon was silent except for the faint hiss of wind through dry grass. Something felt wrong. Not just wrong, staged. I'm a Marine. We're trained to assess threats, to read terrain, to trust instincts. And my instincts were screaming. The car was positioned too perfectly, the suitcase too theatrical, the bodies too symmetrically placed. It looked like a set piece. I reached under my seat and pulled out my 9mm, chambered around. The metallic slide echoed inside the car. If those people were injured, I should help. That's the human response. But stepping out into waist-high grass with no visibility and two motionless victims blocking the road, that felt like suicide. I studied the geometry of the scene. There was a narrow gap. If I steered left around the man, cut sharply right around the woman, and squeezed behind the Fiero's trunk, I could make it. It would be inches, but it was possible. I didn't want to crawl past them. I needed speed, momentum. I dropped the transmission into gear and floored it. The engine roared. I veered left, missing the man by what felt like inches, cut right hard. The woman flashed past my passenger window. The red bumper of the Fiero filled my vision. I swerved behind it. No impact, no thump. I was through. I drove another couple 100 feet before easing off the gas. My hands were shaking. I checked the dash. No warning lights, no damage. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. The bodies were moving. The man and woman pushed themselves up off the asphalt. Fluid, controlled. They stood. And then the grass moved. Not wind movement. People. From both sides of the canyon, figures emerged from the tall grass. One after another. 10, 15, at least 20. They had been hiding, blending with the terrain. They gathered around the red Fiero and the two decoys like a coordinated unit. The bodies in the road were bait. The car was the trap. The grass was the ambush. A cold terror flooded my system. I slammed the accelerator to the floor. The engine screamed as I shot down the canyon, barely registering curves or speed limits. I kept checking the mirror, expecting the red Fiero to spin around and chase. It never did. I didn't slow down until I saw the green sign for Interstate 40. Merging into normal traffic felt surreal. Semi-trucks, families, ordinary life. But the shaking didn't stop for miles. I've replayed that day countless times. If I had stepped out to help, I would have been surrounded instantly. 20 people in the middle of nowhere. Even armed, those are not odds you win. I don't know who they were, a cult, a gang, human traffickers, something else. But I know it wasn't random, it was organized. And it was designed to make someone stop. The scariest part isn't that it happened in darkness. It happened under a bright desert sun. Sometimes real life doesn't need shadows to be terrifying. It was one of those humid, electric nights in Taiwan when the air feels thick enough to drink. I had been wandering through a night market for hours, neon signs stacked vertically above narrow streets, scooters weaving through pedestrians, vendors shouting prices over the hiss of frying oil. The smell of stinky tofu, grilled squid, and bubble tea hung in the air like perfume. After a while, I realized I hadn't checked in with home. This was before smartphones were glued to our hands, so I started looking for a net cafe. Taiwanese buildings are stacked like drawers in a cabinet, shops on every floor. I spotted a glowing sign that read, Net Cafe 6F, just off the main drag of the market. Perfect. The entrance to the building was a narrow, dark corridor, squeezed between two brightly lit stalls. The transition from noise to silence was abrupt. One moment I was surrounded by people. The next I was standing in a damp hallway that smelled like concrete and stale cigarettes. At the end of the hall was an elevator. When the doors slid open, I was surprised. The interior was sleek and modern. Polished steel, bright LED lights, clean mirror. It felt like someone had dropped a spaceship into a decaying building. I stepped inside and looked at the buttons. In Taiwanese culture, the number 4 is avoided because its pronunciation sounds almost identical to the word for death. So many buildings skip the 4th floor entirely. Sure enough, the panel read 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. No 4. I pressed 6. The doors shut smoothly, and the elevator began to rise. 1, 2, 3. It continued upward. The car slowed. Ding. The doors slid open. I stepped forward instinctively and stopped mid-stride. There was no internet cafe. There were no fluorescent lights or rows of computers. There was darkness, not dim lighting, not a hallway. A heavy, suffocating blackness that swallowed the elevator's white light. The floor beyond looked abandoned for decades. Dust hung in the air. Random pieces of furniture were scattered around the large room. Salon chairs, maybe desks, all draped in thick white sheets. They rose from the darkness like ghostly shapes. The elevator in that building opened directly into each floor's single unit. I could see nearly the entire space. It was empty and wrong. Confused, I glanced back at the control panel. The display above the door was blank. No floor number. The 6 button was still lit, as if I hadn't arrived yet. The elevator had stopped somewhere that wasn't on the panel. That's when I noticed movement. At the far end of the room, something shifted in the shadows. A figure. It looked human, but the posture was off. It wore something pale and loose like a gown or salon smock. It wasn't walking so much as gliding, slowly approaching the elevator with deliberate, unnatural calm. A cold wave of fear hit me so hard, it felt physical. I slammed my hand on the close door button. Come on, I whispered. The figure was getting closer. And then the lights went out. Completely. The elevator dropped into absolute darkness. No emergency glow, no panel lights, nothing. For a split second that stretched into eternity, I stood trapped in a metal box, unsure whether the doors were still open. I imagined a hand reaching into the darkness, but imagined breath on my neck. I was seconds from losing control. Then the lights flickered back on with a harsh buzz. The doors were sliding shut. Through the narrowing gap, I saw the white-draped shapes again, and the figure still approaching. The doors sealed. The elevator jolted upward. Moments later, ding, the doors opened again. this time to bright fluorescent lights, rows of computers, cigarette smoke, and the sound of clicking keyboards. The internet cafe. I walked out on shaky legs, sat down at a terminal, and just breathed. I didn't even log in. I needed to hear people talking, needed to feel normal air. Eventually, I paid at the counter and told the cashier what had happened. Her bored expression vanished instantly. She went pale. She leaned in close and spoke quietly. "The building has 6 floors," she said, "but the 4th floor has history." Years ago, that floor had been a busy hair salon. One night, a young stylist stayed late after closing. In the washing area, over one of the ceramic basins, she slit her wrists. She wasn't found until morning. The salon reopened, but customers began reporting strange things. Water that looked red while getting their hair rinsed. Reflections in mirrors of someone standing behind them when no one was there. A cold, oppressive atmosphere. Business collapsed. The owner tried to rent the space again. No one wanted it. Eventually, a stationery shop leased it cheaply, planning renovations. During construction, tools disappeared. A large mirror shattered on its own, and then an elevator incident. The doors reportedly closed on a worker's hand with crushing force and refused to open. His hand was badly broken. The crew walked off the job. The lease was canceled. The building owner gave up and shut the 4th floor down permanently to make sure no one could access it. He had the elevator company physically remove the 4 button and reprogram the system to skip the floor entirely. The cashier looked at me carefully. "The elevator is programmed to never stop at the 4th floor," she said. "It shouldn't be able to." "But sometimes," she admitted. "Usually late at night, it does. It overrides the programming. It opens to the dark floor. And sometimes people see a woman in a pale salon, smock, walking through the abandoned space, still working. Or still waiting." When I left that night, I didn't touch the elevator. I took the stairs down all 6 flights. The stairwell was humid and dim. When I passed the unmarked door between the 3rd and 5th floors, the door that technically shouldn't exist, I didn't look at it. I ran the rest of the way down. When I burst back into the noise and neon chaos of the night market, the world felt louder than ever. I never went back to that building, and I've never looked at an elevator panel the same way again. Last year, around this same time, something happened that I still can't fully explain. And the strangest part is that it didn't happen in some deep, remote wilderness. It happened on a stretch of city-owned land that most people around here consider completely harmless. It's mostly prairie, tall grasses that ripple in the wind, open sky above, a river cutting through the middle like a dark ribbon. Toward the far end, there's about a mile of woods. Nothing massive, just a patch of trees thick enough to feel separate from the open field. Families walk there during the day. People fish along the riverbank. Kids ride bikes on the nearby path. It doesn't have the reputation of being dangerous. That night, though, something felt off. Not at first. At first, everything felt normal. My ex and I were hanging out with one of his older friends. He was a couple decades older than us, the type of guy who still jokes around like he's 20, even though he's clearly not. We were in that goofy, restless mood where everything seems funny and harmless. It was early evening, the sky fading from gold to blue, and we were wandering through the woods just because we could. At some point, for reasons I still don't fully understand, we started doing fake war calls. Loud, ridiculous screams meant to echo. We were laughing at ourselves, not thinking about who or what might hear us. The trees caught our voices and threw them back in broken pieces. It felt childish and stupid and fun. We were loud, loud enough that our voices carried through the woods and out across the prairie. After a while, my ex's friend said he was heading back to the car. He wasn't upset. He just didn't feel like hiking around anymore. My ex and I wanted to explore a little longer, so we stayed behind. We wandered deeper, following trails we didn't recognize, letting the light fade more than we should have. It was almost dark when we finally turned around to head back. The woods felt different in that light. The shadows weren't just darker, they seemed thicker, stretching between the trees like something solid. The sounds around us had quieted, not silent, but muted. The kind of quiet where your own footsteps sound too loud. That's when the deer ran out. It burst across the path in front of us so fast that we both froze. It didn't hesitate. It didn't pause to look at us. It sprinted, then leapt over a fallen tree that I swear was too tall for a normal deer to clear so smoothly. It didn't stumble. It didn't clip a branch. It looked like something escaping. For a split second, I had the strange thought that it wasn't running from us. We were still staring in the direction it had gone when we heard it. Our scream, not similar, exact, same pitch, same rhythm, same stupid call we had been making earlier. It echoed from deeper in the woods, behind us. My ex and I turned at the same time. The sound was too close, too precise. It didn't trail off like an echo should. It sounded deliberate. We both thought the same thing instantly. His friend. He had doubled back to mess with us. "Hey!" my ex shouted. "That's not funny. Come out." Silence. No rustling, no crunch of leaves, no laughter. We called his name again. Nothing. We pulled out our phones and called him, expecting to at least hear his ringtone somewhere in the trees. The phone rang in my ex's hand. The woods stayed silent. No ringtone, no vibration. That was the moment the feeling shifted. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was something colder. We started walking faster toward the prairie. Neither of us said much. We just kept glancing over our shoulders. The trees behind us felt closer than they should have, even as we moved away from them. When we stepped out of the tree line and into the open prairie, there was a brief, fragile sense of relief. At least nothing could hide in grass the way it could in trees. But the feeling of being followed didn't disappear. It intensified. The open field suddenly felt too exposed. I kept turning around to look. On one of those glances, I saw something near the river. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The sky was darker now, the water reflecting the last thin streak of dusk. There was a shape crouched near the bank. It looked almost like a person squatting to fish, but the proportions were wrong. Too wide, too thick through the torso. The outline wasn't clear enough to see details, but it was darker than the shadows around it, like it absorbed the fading light instead of reflecting it. It didn't move the way a person shifts or adjusts. It just existed there. I told myself it was a rock or a fallen tree shaped strangely. We kept walking faster. Then my ex said quietly, "Hey, I don't want to freak you out, but I think I see something behind us." My heart dropped so hard it felt physical. I turned toward him slowly. "Oh," I said before I could stop myself. "You see it too." We didn't need to describe it. We both knew. That was when we ran. Not a jog, not a quick walk, a full sprint. We didn't look back. The prairie grass whipped against our legs as we cut across it. My lungs burned almost immediately, but I didn't slow down. I had the overwhelming sense that if I stopped, even for a second, whatever was behind us would close the distance. We missed the proper trail back to the car and ended up on the town's bike path near the edge of the woods. It was darker there, the trees leaning inward over the pavement, but somehow it felt safer than the open field, safer than whatever had been near the river. We called his friend again. No answer. Called again. Nothing. By the fifth or sixth call, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. When he finally picked up, his voice was completely calm. "Why do you guys keep calling me?" he asked. "I'm in the car. Been on the phone this whole time." The words hit me like ice water. "You never came back into the woods?" my ex asked. "No," he said. "I've been here." There was no hesitation in his voice, no hint of joking. He offered to walk toward us, still sounding relaxed, like we were overreacting to a raccoon. When he reached us on the bike path, my ex and I were pale and shaking. I could feel my pulse in my ears. He looked confused at our panic. We told him everything in broken sentences: the deer, the scream, the shape by the river. He shrugged it off at first, distracted by whatever argument he'd been having on the phone earlier. But my ex and I kept looking at each other in the car afterward. We both knew what we had heard. We both knew it wasn't him. Whatever had repeated our scream had done it perfectly. Not distorted, not warped, exact. And whatever crouched near the river had not moved like a person who had been caught messing with two younger people. It hadn't flinched. It hadn't reacted. It had simply been there. Later, when we looked up recordings of certain mimic-like calls online, some of them were disturbingly similar to the scream we had made in the woods. I don't know what was out there with us that night. I don't know what repeated our voices or why the deer ran the way it did. All I know is that something heard us, something answered, and whatever followed us out of those trees was not our friend, and it was not human. Northern Michigan winters don't just arrive, they settle in. They stretch out across the land and swallow whole months without apology. People talk about the cold first, the kind that bites through gloves and turns breath into smoke. They talk about the storms that bury cars overnight and build snowdrifts so high along the roads that you feel like you're driving through white tunnels. What they don't talk about is the quiet. And they don't talk about the lakes. Up there, lakes don't just freeze. They seal themselves. They hold what's beneath them the way a lid holds down a boiling pot, still on the surface, pressurized underneath. There's a place north of Kalkaska that doesn't show up on maps anymore. If you look at satellite images, you'll see forest, just forest, pine trees packed tight. They logging roads that appear and disappear like scars that never healed right. Hunters know about it. Snowmobilers whisper about it. The older men at bars in Grayling talk about it only after the second or third drink. They call it Birch Hollow Lake. No one agrees on who named it. You don't drive to Birch Hollow on purpose. The logging roads get worse the farther you go. Ruts deepen. Branches scrape your truck. The snow piles higher because no one plows it. Eventually, you start wondering if you took a wrong turn. That's when you find it, or maybe it finds you. In winter, the snow there isn't white, it's blue. Not the pale blue of morning light, a darker shade, bruise-colored. The deeper into the season you get, the more the snow seems to take on that tint, like the cold stains it from underneath. The first thing anyone notices about Birch Hollow Lake is the ice. Most frozen lakes cloud over. Frost blooms across the surface. Air bubbles get trapped inside, turning the water milky and opaque. But Birch Hollow freezes, clear, too clear. By February, you can stand on it and see straight down. It's like walking on glass laid over dark water. Hunters say that on sunny days, when the light hits it just right, you can see shapes beneath your boots. Long shapes. Spindly, like fingers. They drift in the water below, stretching upward, bending slightly with currents you can't see. At first, you tell yourself it's weeds. Dead branches sunk to the bottom, but weeds don't curl, and branches don't twitch. Most people don't look long enough to confirm what they're seeing. There's something about standing on that lake that makes you want to keep moving. The stories about Birch Hollow go back nearly a century. In the 1920s, there was a small logging settlement near the edge of the forest. Nothing permanent, a handful of cabins, families living close together, cutting pine and hauling it out before winter sealed the roads. That winter, something happened. County records still show it. Dry, official language written in ink that's faded to brown. 6 children disappeared over the course of a week. No tracks were found in the snow, no signs of struggle, just empty beds and missing boots by the door. The parents searched. They walked miles through drifts that swallowed their legs to the knee. They combed the woods in groups. They checked every frozen creek and hollow. Nothing. Then the parents who went searching started disappearing too. By the time spring came, nearly half the settlement was gone. When the thaw finally broke the lake open, it gave an answer. That's what the stories say, anyway. People claimed that when the ice softened and cracked, faces rose up against the underside, bloated and pale, eyes wide, mouths open, pressed so tightly to the ice that their features flattened, as if they'd been trying to push through. Some swore the bodies weren't floating freely. They were held just beneath the surface, suspended like flowers pressed between pages. The county never wrote that part down. Officially, it was a series of unfortunate disappearances during a harsh winter. Unofficially, the road to the settlement stopped being maintained. The forest grew back over the cabins. The name Birch Hollow stopped appearing in documents, but people still find it, and every few years, someone doesn't come back. The story that lingers most in town belongs to a man named Grady. He wasn't known for exaggerating. He worked construction most of his life. Big shoulders, calloused hands, the type who laughed at anything that sounded supernatural. He told his story one night at a bar in Grayling. He'd been drinking, sure, but not enough to mistake fear for drama. He said he'd been ice fishing on Birch Hollow Lake. He'd done it before, plenty of times. Set up a little shelter, drilled his hole, waited for perch. That night, he walked out alone. The sky was clear, the moon bright enough to throw shadows across the snow. He knelt down to drill. That's when he noticed the ice. It was thinner than he expected. Not dangerously thin, just too clear, too perfect. He could see down into the water like he was staring through a window. At first, he saw shadows, long and wavering. Then they started to rise. He leaned closer. The shapes sharpened. They weren't fish. They were small. Children. He said they floated just beneath the ice, hands pressed flat against it. Their fingers looked blackened, twisted, like they'd been frozen too long. Their eyes were open and unblinking. Their mouths moved, opening and closing, as if speaking through water. He swore one of them rose high enough that its face pressed fully against the ice. He could see the shape of its lips, and though he couldn't hear a voice the way you hear someone standing beside you, he said the word formed clear as day. Lower. The lips moved again. Lower. Over and over. Grady stumbled back. He didn't pack up neatly. He left his gear. He ran. He didn't go back to the lake again. A year later, they found him dead in his small house. The official cause was alcohol-related, an empty bottle on the table beside him. On that same table, scratched lightly into the wood, was a single word. Lower, not carved deep, not dramatic, just etched in like someone who couldn't stop their hand from moving. Spring at Birch Hollow is no cleaner than winter. When April loosens the ice, it doesn't melt smoothly, it fractures. Large panes break off and drift toward shore. Locals say that sometimes caught in weeds near the edge, you'll find shapes tangled in the debris. Not full bodies, pieces. A shape like a jawbone. Something long and thin that might be a rib. Once, someone swore they found what looked like a child's hand, gray and swollen, wedged between two chunks of ice. By summer, it's all gone. The lake clears itself, resets. No remains reported, no investigations, just water reflecting sky. Hunters who wander too close in January tell their own stories. They say if you're alone on the ice and the wind drops completely, you might hear knocking. Soft at first. Tap, 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 rhythmic, as if someone beneath the surface is testing the barrier. One hunter admitted he kneeled once, just to look. He said the moment his weight shifted closer to the ice, the water beneath seemed to sharpen into focus. The glassy surface thinned in appearance like it was stretching. He saw shadows press upward, hands, faces, something straining. He didn't wait long enough to see more. He stood and left. He never hunted that area again. The old men in Grayling don't laugh when Birch Hollow comes up. They lean close instead, lowering their voices as if the trees might carry sound back to the lake. They give the same warning every time. If you hear knocking beneath the ice, don't you dare kneel to look. Because they say that's when it happens. The ice doesn't shatter like it does in movies. It doesn't explode. It thins. It sighs. And then it gives. And whatever has been waiting below, whatever has been pressing its hands against that glass all winter, finally gets what it's been asking for. They've been waiting a very long time. And up there, winters are long enough to teach patience. That night, the sky opened up like it had been holding its breath all summer. The rain came down in hard, steady sheets, drumming against the old farmhouse roof and rattling the loose gutter outside. My bedroom window, the orchard behind the house, which had been dry and dusty for weeks, turned dark and slick. I could smell the rain even from inside. Wet soil, crushed leaves, and the faint, sour sweetness of fallen apples breaking open in the grass. I lay in bed listening to it. The sound should have been comforting. It usually was. But my mind kept drifting back to the clearing I had found 2 days earlier. The oval patch of pressed grass. The bare dirt in the center. The strange feeling I'd had standing there, like I had walked into something that didn't belong to me. The rain didn't wash that feeling away. In the morning, the storm had passed. The air felt heavy and clean at the same time. Everything smelled alive. The sun pushed through thin clouds, lighting up the orchard in a soft, pale glow. The ground was soaked, the soil dark and swollen. When I stepped onto the porch, I could hear water dripping from leaves and branches in a slow, steady rhythm. At breakfast, my parents were relaxed for once. They were visiting old friends who owned the bed and breakfast, and everyone seemed happy to let me roam as long as I wasn't glued to a screen. They were deep in conversation over coffee and eggs, laughing about old stories. When I asked if I could head back into the orchard, they barely looked up. "Just don't go too far," my mom said, though she didn't ask how far I had already gone the day before. "I won't," I said. I didn't mention the clearing. I didn't mention the forest beyond the orchard. I didn't mention the way the place had made me feel watched. I waited until the afternoon so the ground could dry a little. Even then, I knew it would still be muddy. That didn't matter. Curiosity had a stronger pull than comfort. In my room, I packed like I was preparing for something important. I grabbed my backpack and stuffed in a sweatshirt, a sandwich I made in the kitchen, and, after checking that no one was looking, 2 beers from the fridge. I slid them deep into the bag under the sweatshirt, my heart pounding harder from that small act than it had from anything in the orchard so far. I told myself I was going exploring. Really, I was going back to that clearing. When I stepped off the porch, the mud clung to my boots immediately. The orchard stretched out in straight rows, apple trees lined up with careful precision. Their leaves were still wet, and drops fell on me as I brushed past. The air was cooler now, and the sky had that washed-out look that comes after a storm. I followed the same direction I had taken before, keeping the house behind me. The rows felt endless. Bark and leaves, over and over. It was easy to lose your sense of direction in there. Everything looked the same. If you turned around too quickly, you could forget which way you had come from. I walked for what felt like hours, the rhythm of my steps steady. The mud made a soft sucking sound with each lift of my boots. My mind drifted between thoughts of old relics and the clearing. I tried to tell myself the clearing had a simple explanation. Animals slept in orchards. Kids could have snuck out here years ago. You workers could have done something I didn't understand. But the image of that bare patch of earth stayed sharp in my mind. Eventually, the orchard changed. The rows ended at a low stone wall that ran across the landscape like a scar. The stones were gray and uneven, stacked long ago by someone patient and stubborn. Moss and lichen covered parts of it, and in some places it had crumbled into piles of loose rock. Beyond the wall, about 100 feet out, the land turned wild. A thick forest began, dark and dense compared to the open order of the orchard. The trees there grew close together, their branches tangled. I felt a rush of excitement at finding the wall. It felt like a real boundary. Civilization on one side, something older on the other. I followed the wall for a long time, running my fingers over the cold stone. In the gaps where it had collapsed, I knelt and sifted through dirt and rubble, hoping to find something historic. A bullet, a button, anything that proved people had stood here long before me. I didn't find metal, but I did find arrowheads near the base of the wall. They were chipped from flint, sharp and smooth. They lay half buried as if the rain had loosened them from their hiding place. I brushed the dirt away carefully and held one up to the light. It felt strange in my hand, old, quiet. I slipped them into my bag, my excitement growing. The orchard felt less empty now. It felt layered, like it held more than apples and mud. After a while, I climbed onto a sturdy section of the wall to rest. I let my legs dangle and pulled out my sandwich and one of the beers. The afternoon was still, no wind, no voices from the house. Just the soft hum of insects and the distant drip of water. I ate slowly and took a few careful sips of the warm beer, trying to enjoy the feeling of being alone and independent. Out there, sitting on that wall, I felt like the world was mine. Then something crashed in the forest beyond the wall. It wasn't subtle. It sounded like heavy branches snapping, underbrush being shoved aside. The sound was deep and solid, not like a bird or a rabbit. I froze. The sandwich paused halfway to my mouth. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my ears. I swallowed the last bite too quickly, nearly choking, and shoved everything back into my bag. I slid off the wall and crouched low behind it, pressing my back to the cold stone. From the forest, 3 coyotes stepped out into the open space between the trees and the wall. They were bigger than I expected. Their fur was damp and matted from the rain, their bodies lean but strong. They moved with calm purpose, not skittish, not rushed. I ducked down fully, my breath shallow. I knew coyotes weren't supposed to attack people, but that knowledge didn't comfort me. I was alone. They were not. For a moment, I listened to their paws pressing into wet leaves. Slow, soft, intent. I slowly raised my head just enough to see over the wall. They hadn't noticed me. They were sniffing along the edge of the orchard, following some scent. I watched them longer than I meant to. There was something almost organized about the way they moved. When one stopped, the others stopped. When one tilted its head, the others seemed to pay attention. Each time one paused, I dropped back down, my pulse racing. It felt like a game I hadn't agreed to play. Eventually, the wall thinned out and ended in a collapsed heap of stones. I had followed the coyotes without realizing how far I'd gone. When I stepped past the last pile of rock, I was fully exposed. All 3 coyotes stopped at once. They turned their heads toward me. The way they looked at me made my stomach twist. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It felt measured, curious. We stood like that for a few seconds, the damp air thick between us. Then, as if they had decided something, they turned away and continued along the grass, moving parallel to the orchard before fading back toward the trees. I let out a long breath and told myself not to be dramatic. They were just animals. Still, I didn't linger. I turned and began walking back through the orchard toward the house. I kept my pace steady, trying not to look over my shoulder too often. The rows blurred together, and within minutes I wasn't entirely sure which direction I had come from. The orchard had a way of swallowing landmarks. To distract myself, I scanned the ground again for old objects. That was when I stumbled onto the clearing. It was the same one. The grass was still pressed down in that oval shape. But now, after the rain, the details were sharper. The edges of the flattened area were uneven, churned into the mud. It didn't look like an animal bed. It looked disturbed, worked over. The center patch of bare earth was darker now. The rain had washed away loose dirt, exposing something beneath. Something dark and smooth pushed up through the mud. My pulse quickened again, but this time from excitement. I knelt down without thinking about the mud soaking into my jeans and grabbed the object. The ground gave easily under my fingers. It came free with a wet, sucking sound. The thing was heavy, heavier than it should have been. I wiped mud away with my thumbs, slowly revealing the shape. It was stone, carved. The body was thick and rounded with exaggerated features, a swollen belly, short limbs. It looked like a crude human figure, but the top was jagged, the head was gone. A cold sensation slid down my spine. I remembered a book I had read when I was younger about ancient tribes and rituals. I remembered a picture of a headless fertility idol, broken and buried. I remembered how that image had unsettled me for days. This looked like that. I held it in both hands. The stone felt colder than the air, dense, wrong. I became aware of the silence around me. The orchard felt tight, like it was holding its breath. Without fully understanding why, I shoved the figurine into my backpack and zipped it shut fast like I was sealing something inside. I began walking quickly. After a few minutes, I heard it. Crunch. Step. Crunch. I stopped. Silence. I walked again. Crunch. Step. Crunch. It matched me. My mouth went dry. I stopped again. Nothing. I dropped low, suddenly, and turned, peering through the trees. About 25 yards back, I saw them. The 3 coyotes. They weren't wandering now. They were following, low to the ground, focused. When I stood and walked slowly, they walked slowly. When I picked up my pace, they did too. It didn't feel random anymore. My heart hammered as panic built in my chest. I was just a kid with a stolen beer in my bag and mud on my jeans, and something was keeping pace with me. Then I heard humming. It drifted through the orchard, low and melodic. The sound cut cleanly through the tension. The coyote's ears turned toward it. Ahead, walking along the edge of the orchard, was Serene. She wore a long shawl around her shoulders, her posture relaxed. Relief flooded me. I almost ran toward her. She smiled when she saw me, as if she had expected me. I pointed behind me. They've been following me. She looked at the coyotes and laughed softly. They are only curious, she said. They smell your food. They will not hurt you. The coyotes stopped a distance away and sat, watching. They told me you followed them, she added. I frowned. Told you? She smiled faintly. You are curious like their brother Wolf, so they are curious about you. Her tone was calm, but something in her eyes felt deeper, knowing. As we walked back toward the house, I remembered the weight in my bag. I found something, I said. She glanced at me, distracted. In the clearing, I continued, the one where the grass is pressed down. Her steps slowed almost too slightly to notice. I pulled off my backpack and reached inside. My fingers closed around the stone. I don't think animals did that, I said. It looked more like people. I pulled the figurine out and held it up between us. The dried mud clung to its surface. The broken neck was jagged. Serene's face drained of color instantly. Her eyes widened, not in surprise but in recognition. She reached out with trembling hands and took the figurine from me. Her grip tightened around it so hard her knuckles turned pale. For a moment she just stared at it. Then she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What have you done, boy?" "I didn't do anything," I said quickly. "It was just buried. The rain—" Her entire body began to shake. Her expression changed in a way I had never seen before. The warmth left her face. Her eyes opened wider, showing white all around the iris. Her mouth pulled back slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice was no longer calm. It was raw, guttural, filled with something ancient and furious. "What have you done?" There is a kind of freedom that hits you when you get your first apartment, and it feels almost like getting away with something. It's not just the keys in your hand. It's the idea that no one can tell you to turn the TV down. No one can ask where you're going. No one can stand in a doorway and watch you like they're waiting to catch you doing something wrong. The day I signed the lease, my hand shook a little as I wrote my name. Part of it was nerves, part of it was plain excitement. I was young and hungry for my own life, and I felt like I had found the perfect place by luck alone. It wasn't one of those clean, modern units in a big complex where every door looks the same. This place had character. It had history. The building was a massive old antebellum house that had been converted into 4 apartments. The first time I saw it, I stopped on the sidewalk and just stared. It sat back from the street like it owned the whole block. White columns held up a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. The paint was a little tired, but it still looked proud. Ancient oak trees spread their branches over the yard, and Spanish moss hung down in slow gray curtains that moved even when there wasn't much wind. The whole place looked like it belonged in a movie. The rent was surprisingly low for the size and the neighborhood, and when the landlord told me the amount, I honestly thought I misheard him. He was friendly in a practiced way. He talked fast, like he was used to selling people on the idea before they had time to think too hard. He pointed out the high ceilings, the original molding, the restored hardwood floors. He used words like charming and unique and full of life. He said the tenants were quiet. He said the walls were thick. He said it was a great place for a young professional. I remember standing in the entryway of my unit, looking up at the 12-foot ceiling, imagining my own furniture there, imagining friends on the porch with drinks, imagining that I had finally crossed some invisible line into adulthood. The apartment smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish. The windows were tall. The sunlight came in at an angle that made dust sparkle in the air. Everything creaked in a way that felt comforting at first, like the building was settling around you. I signed without asking too many questions. When I look back, that part makes me feel stupid, but it's easy to be brave when you're excited. It's easy to ignore small warning signs when you want something badly enough. Moving in was a blur. Boxes, tape, pizza grease on napkins, friends coming and going with arms full of lamps and chairs. My new place echoed when it was empty, and every sound bounced down the halls. The floorboards complained under every step. The door frames were slightly uneven. The kitchen cabinets didn't close all the way unless you pushed them until they clicked. It was all the kind of stuff that makes an old place feel real. For the first couple of weeks, I loved it. I hung pictures, I arranged books on shelves. I bought a cheap rug for the living room and felt proud of myself for choosing something adult. I invited people over just to show it off. I liked watching their faces when they stepped inside and looked up at the ceiling and said, "No way. You live here?" I liked the sense that I had won some small secret prize. There were small things I noticed, but I brushed them off. A draft that moved down the hallway even when the windows were shut. The way the shadows in the corners of the living room seemed deeper than they should be at night, like the darkness had weight. The way the air in the back part of the apartment was always cooler than the front, no matter how I set the thermostat. None of it felt alarming, not at first. Old house stuff. That was the point, right? The bathroom was at the back of the unit. It was small and windowless. tucked away like it had been added on later or carved out of space someone didn't know what to do with. The fixtures were old, probably from mid-century renovations. The clawfoot tub was one of those things you brag about to people. But it was also the kind of tub that always felt a little too deep, a little too cold, like it belonged to someone else's life. A shower ring hung from the ceiling with a plastic curtain that stuck to your skin if you weren't careful. The first time I felt it, I was in the shower. Hot water ran over my shoulders. Steam fogged the mirror. The fan above me rattled in a tired, uneven way. I was half awake in that sleepy, relaxed state people get under warm water when, out of nowhere, the back of my neck prickled. It was the feeling of being watched. Not the kind of paranoia you get from a scary movie, not a vague unease. It was immediate and physical, like someone had stepped into the room and was standing close enough that you could feel their presence, even with your eyes closed. I froze with shampoo still in my hair. My heart gave a hard jump, and for a second I couldn't move. Then I jerked around and yanked the shower curtain back so fast it snapped on the ring. The bathroom was empty, the door was locked. The toilet lid was down. My towel hung on the back of the door where I'd left it. The only movement was the steam twisting toward the vent. I laughed out loud, too loud, like I was trying to embarrass myself into calming down. I told myself it was new place nerves. That was a thing, right? People got weird in unfamiliar spaces. The house creaked. The fan made odd noises. I had moved out for the first time. My brain was probably looking for threats because it didn't know what else to do with all that change. But the feeling came back the next day, and the next. It became a pattern. Every time I stepped into that bathroom, my body tightened like it was bracing. I would lock the door even though I lived alone. I would pull the curtain aside before I undressed, even though there was nowhere to hide behind it. Sometimes I would look up toward the corner near the ceiling because that was where it felt strongest, like the eyes were coming from above, just out of sight. It didn't feel like a ghost in a sheet. It felt like a tension, like something focused on me with patience. I tried to make it make sense. I blamed the acoustics. I blamed the steam. I told myself that small enclosed rooms can do weird things to your head. I started playing music on my phone while I showered, loud enough to fill the bathroom so silence couldn't creep in. It didn't help. Showering stopped being relaxing. It turned into something I had to get through. I'd stand under the spray with my shoulders hunched and my eyes constantly flicking to the curtain, to the mirror, to the corner. Near the ceiling, my breathing would go shallow. My heart would race for no reason I could explain. I started taking shorter showers without meaning to. I'd wash quickly, rinse quickly, and get out like I was escaping something. Then the dreams started. At first they didn't even seem connected. I fell asleep like normal, and in the dream I was in my apartment. It looked exactly right, but also not. The light was dimmer and more yellow, like old bulbs. The air felt heavier. The furniture looked older, as if it had been there longer than I had. In the dream, everything was quiet in a way that felt too quiet, as if the building itself was holding still. And in the hallway, I would see an old lady. She was small and thin, with wispy white hair that sat soft around her head. She looked like somebody's grandmother, the kind of woman you might see in a church lobby smiling at children. She wore a long pink nightgown with lace around the collar, the kind of thing you picture in old photographs from the 1950s. It was a gentle color, almost comforting. The fabric looked worn, like it had been washed 100 times. The first few dreams, she didn't scare me. She stood at the end of the hallway or in the corner of my bedroom, her posture straight and calm. She watched me with an expression that wasn't angry. It was patient. She would lift one hand and beckon me with slow fingers, and I would hear her voice, not out loud, but in my head, like a thought that didn't belong to me. "You should come with me." She never said where. She never explained what she wanted. It was just that one invitation, repeated with the same quiet certainty. In the dream, I would feel pulled toward her, not dragged, not forced. It was more like a heavy curiosity and a strange, sad pity. Like if I didn't follow her, something would remain unfinished. I would take a step, and then I would wake up in my bed with sweat on my skin, and the echo of her words still lingering in my mind. The first few times, I shrugged it off. Recurring dreams happen. Moving stress happens. The house had a mood, and my brain probably shaped it into a story at night. But the dreams didn't stay gentle. They changed gradually, which somehow made it worse. If it had gone from sweet to horrible overnight, I might have told myself it was just a nightmare. But it shifted like rot spreading under paint. In the dreams, the light took on a sick, greenish tint, like the glow from an old television left on in a dark room. Shadows stretched longer, warping the corners. The apartment still looked like mine, but it felt wrong, like it was wearing my home as a mask. The old woman in the pink nightgown appeared closer each time. At first she was down the hallway, then she was in the doorway. Then she was standing at the foot of my bed. Her face stopped looking kind. Her skin turned gray and papery, pulled too tight across the bones. The soft lines around her mouth sharpened. Her cheeks sank inward. Her hair, once wispy and white, looked greasy and stringy, stuck to her scalp in clumps. In places, it seemed to be missing altogether, showing raw patches underneath, and her eyes. Her eyes became empty, not just closed, not clouded. Hollow black sockets, like someone had scooped the eyes out and left the holes behind. When I stared into them, it felt like staring into deep water at night. The worst part was her mouth. It didn't smile anymore. It stretched open in a way that made my stomach drop, like her jaw had slipped loose. It hung too low, exposing teeth that looked too small, too far back. The expression wasn't a scream you could hear. It was a silent scream that seemed permanent, trapped in her face. She stopped beckoning. She stopped asking. Instead, she lunged. In the dream, my body wouldn't move. I would try to sit up, to raise my arms, to kick. Nothing happened. I would lie there paralyzed while she rushed at me, the pink nightgown flowing behind her like something underwater. Her hands clawed at the air, fingers bent like hooks, reaching for my throat. My eyes, my mouth. I could hear her breath wet and rattling like mucus in her chest. It filled the room, louder than the fan, louder than my heartbeat. I would try to scream, but no sound came out. I would feel the cold wind of her movement inches from my face. Then I would jerk awake so hard my muscles ached. My heart would hammer like I'd been running. I would sit up in bed with my eyes wide, staring at the dark hallway, half expecting to see her standing there. After a few nights of that, I stopped sleeping properly. I started leaving lights on. I sat in the living room at 2 in the morning with every lamp glowing, watching dumb TV shows at low volume just to keep my mind from slipping back into the dream. And during the day, the bathroom got worse. The feeling of being watched became more than a sensation. It began to feel like danger. The air in the bathroom would turn cold even when I ran the shower as hot as it would go. The steam would rise, and yet goosebumps would crawl up my arms. I'd step in, and it would feel like something was close behind me, close enough that if I turned too fast, I would bump into it. Sometimes, in the mirror, I thought I saw movement behind me, a shadow passing just out of my line of sight. When I whipped around, nothing was there, but my stomach would clench all the same. I started avoiding looking into the mirror for too long. I knew the trick of it, how your brain plays games in dim light. I knew that. But knowing didn't help when your body reacts first. I tried practical fixes because that's what you do when you're trying to stay sane. I replaced the bathroom bulbs with brighter ones. I cleaned the mirror until it shined. I bought a new shower curtain, thicker, less clingy. I sprayed lavender air freshener because someone once told me lavender calms nerves. The bathroom stayed the same. I even called the landlord once and told him the fan rattled and the air felt odd back there. He came by, tapped the vent, nodded like he understood, and said, "Old houses breathe." He tightened something, made a joke about ghosts, and left. That joke hit wrong, not because I believed in ghosts at that point, but because it felt too easy, too casual. The months slid by, and the fear settled into me like a habit. I didn't talk about it much. If I mentioned it to friends, I made it sound like a funny quirk, like, "This old place is creepy sometimes, you know." People laughed. People said, "That's what you get for living in a haunted mansion." People wanted it to be entertaining, but it wasn't entertaining when it was just you in the shower with soap stinging your eyes and the certainty that something is staring down from the corner near the ceiling. By the time my lease was nearing its end, I was a mess. I felt tired all the time. I jumped at small noises. I dreaded evenings because sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant her. The fear in the bathroom became specific. It centered on one thing: closing my eyes. It sounds stupid until you've lived it, but I became terrified of closing my eyes under the water. I was convinced that if I shut them too long, if I let my guard down even for a second, I would open them and see her there. Not in the mirror, not in the dream, in the bathroom with me. I started washing my hair with my eyes open. Shampoo burned. Soap ran down my face. I blinked fast and panicked, trying not to squeeze my eyes shut. My showers became 30-second bursts of terror. I would rinse, grab the towel, and rush out as if the room might slam shut behind me. Eventually, I reached a simple truth. The cheap rent and the beautiful architecture were not worth my mind. I didn't renew the lease. When I packed, it wasn't slow or sentimental, it was urgent. I moved boxes like I was escaping a fire. I didn't linger on the porch. I didn't take one last look at the oak trees and the moss. The day I carried the final box to my car, I felt something lift off me like a tight band had snapped. I drove away and didn't look back. A few months later, I was in a newer place. Plain walls, clean vents, a bathroom with a window. The dreams stopped. The fear faded. I could stand under the water and close my eyes like a normal person. Slowly, I began to believe the whole thing had been stress and imagination and an old house getting under my skin. One afternoon, I met a friend for coffee. He had moved into a neighborhood near my old apartment. In fact, he had rented a house directly across the street from that antebellum building. It came up casually, like most things do, and I felt oddly brave. Time gives you false courage. I joked about my old place. I told him about the bathroom dread, the shower phobia, the dreams about the old lady in the pink nightgown. I laughed while I said it, because laughter is easier than admitting how scared you were. My friend didn't laugh. His face drained of color, and he set his cup down with both hands like he needed the table to steady himself. "Wait," he said slowly. "Pink nightgown?" I felt my stomach tighten. "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "It's ridiculous, I know." He stared at me for a second, then looked away as if he was deciding whether to say what he knew. Finally, he leaned in and lowered his voice. "I have a friend," he said, "a guy you don't know. He lived in that building a few years ago. The unit above yours." I sat still, my pulse ticking in my throat. "He told me the tenants all knew about that house," my friend continued. "The landlord doesn't exactly advertise it, but people talk." "What history?" I asked, though I already felt like I knew. My friend swallowed. "Unit 4, he said. "The one you had. It's the one people avoid." My hands went cold. "There was an old woman who lived there alone," he said. "She was kind of a recluse, didn't have family coming around. She had..." I don't know, a stroke or a heart attack, something like that. And she collapsed in the bathroom. I couldn't breathe for a second. She wasn't found for weeks, he said, his eyes on my face. Weeks! My friend said the smell got into the whole building. People complained. That's how they finally checked. My mind flashed to the windowless bathroom, the corner near the ceiling, the cold air against hot steam. She died in there, he said quietly, alone, probably wearing her nightclothes. The coffee shop around us kept moving, people talking, chairs scraping, an espresso machine hissing, but it felt far away. My hearing narrowed like I was underwater. My friend kept talking, but his voice sounded strained now. After that, he said, no one stayed in your unit for long. People would move in because it was cheap and beautiful, and then they'd bail, break the lease, leave in the middle of the night, just gone. My friend said when the place was empty, sometimes he'd hear things through the floor, footsteps like pacing, and sometimes a woman crying. I sat there staring at my cup, feeling sick. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want the story to fit. But it did. Too neatly. The old lady in the pink nightgown wasn't some random dream figure. She was a person who had lived there. The sweet version of her, the soft face and beckoning hand, felt like a memory of who she was before the end. The rotting version, the black sockets, the silent scream, the clawing hands, felt like the truth of what happened in that bathroom when no one came. The invitation to come with her hit differently now. It wasn't a gentle request. It was loneliness sharpened into need. A person trapped in the worst moment of their life, repeating it, reaching for anyone who would follow. I went home that day and stood under my new shower for a long time, letting the water run while I stared at the tile. I kept thinking about that old bathroom with no window, about someone lying on the floor with the door locked, about days turning into nights with no one noticing. I told myself it was over. I wasn't there anymore. I was safe. But the story wasn't done with me. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from that same friend. He sent a link to a news article. I clicked it without thinking, and my throat tightened as the image loaded. There was the old antebellum house, or what was left of it. Flames climbed through the roof. Smoke poured into the sky. Firefighters stood in the yard under harsh lights, their hoses throwing arcs of water that vanished into the heat. The caption named the address, the building I had lived in. My chest went cold. The article said the house had burned down to the ground. The old wood had gone up fast, like dry paper. Fire crews fought it for hours, but it didn't matter. Too much fuel, too many hidden spaces in the walls, too much age. I scrolled, my fingers numb. The investigators had traced the origin of the blaze. Not the attic, not the basement. Unit 4, the back of the unit near the bathroom. They hadn't determined the official cause. No electrical fault, no candles, no gas leak. Nothing that made sense. The fire had simply started. I stared at the photo again, the porch collapsing inward, the columns blackened, the roof falling like a mouth caving in. I didn't feel sad about the loss of a historic house. I didn't feel nostalgic. I felt that same chill I had felt standing in the shower with my eyes burning from shampoo. I thought about the last months in that apartment, about the way the dreams had grown more violent, about the rage in those empty sockets, about the clawing hands and the silent scream. Part of me wondered if she had finally released something that had been building for years, or if the house itself, soaked with all that quiet suffering, had finally given up. And another part of me, the part I try not to listen to, whispered something worse. What if it wasn't release? What if it was a message? You wouldn't come with me, so I will tear the whole cage apart. I sat with my phone in my hand until the screen went dark. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, Fires happen, old houses burn, electrical wiring can fail in ways people can't find. But every time I tried to land on a rational explanation, my mind returned to that corner near the ceiling, to the sense of eyes, to the way my body had known something before I did. Even now, years later, I can take a shower without fear most days. I can close my eyes under the water and breathe. But sometimes, when the bathroom is quiet and the fan makes a certain tired rattle, I get a flicker of that old feeling. Not the feeling of being haunted, the feeling of being noticed. And I remember, with a sick twist in my stomach, that I was the last person to live there before the fire. I slept in her room. I washed in the place where she died. I carried my boxes out and drove away feeling free. And behind me, whether it was anger or grief or something I still can't name, something stayed, until it didn't have walls to stay inside anymore. There is something about your grandparents' house that is supposed to feel safe. It's where time moves slower, where the clocks tick louder, where the same couch has sat in the same place for 20 years, and nothing bad ever seems to happen. My grandma's house is like that during the day. Sunlight through lace curtains, the smell of coffee, old wooden floors that creak in familiar, harmless ways. But at night, it becomes something else. I've been staying there my whole life, and for most of my childhood, it was uneventful. Then, when I was 14, everything changed. That was the year my grandparents started sleeping in separate bedrooms. They were getting older, and it helped them rest better. Because of that switch, I was moved out of my usual guest room and into a different one on the first floor. It seemed harmless at the time. All three of us were on the same level of the house. I should have felt even safer, but the layout matters. The room they moved me into sits directly beneath the upstairs bedroom. And not just any upstairs bedroom. The long, narrow one I've hated since I was little. I don't know when that fear started. Even as a kid, something about the upstairs made my skin crawl. I refuse to go up there alone. I still won't. The air feels heavier up there, like the house is holding its breath. There's one room in particular, long, oddly proportioned. When you open the door, closets flank you immediately on both sides. The bed sits awkwardly in the center, a single window at the far end. Too much empty space, too much shadow. My grandparents once told me that the previous owner's sons used to sleep in that room. According to family lore, the boys claimed that at night a gorilla would come out of one of the closets. It would dance around the room in the dark before slipping back inside. As a child, that story felt silly. A gorilla? It sounded ridiculous. I forgot about it, until I realized my new bedroom was directly beneath that room. The first night I slept there, I couldn't fall asleep. The house went quiet one room at a time. TV off, lights out, doors shut. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of an old house. Then I heard it, thump, thump, thump. Not a creak, not pipes, not wind. Footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate. They started at the far end of the upstairs room, exactly where the window would be, and moved steadily across the floor. The sound traveled from one side to the other, passing directly above my bed, then stopping near where the door upstairs would be. I lay there frozen, fully awake, heart slamming against my ribs. I knew what footsteps sounded like. This wasn't the house settling. I bolted out of bed and ran to my grandpa's room. I was shaking when I woke him up. I told him someone was walking upstairs. He tried to calm me down. Old houses make noise. Wood expands and contracts. It's normal. But seeing how terrified I was, he got up and turned on the dining room light, so the hallway outside my room would glow faintly. That small strip of light made me feel braver. I went back to bed. I had almost convinced myself he was right when it started again. This time, the footsteps reversed direction. They began where they had ended, near the upstairs door, and walked back across the room. over my head again. Slow, heavy, and I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed it would stop. It didn't. 5 seconds after the footsteps reached the far end upstairs, I heard something that changed everything. The stairs. The staircase in that house echoes. Every step is distinct. I heard the first one clearly, then the second, then the third. Slow, measured steps descending toward the first floor. I stopped breathing. They reached the landing. Pause, then continued. One by one, the footsteps came down until they reached my floor. The same hallway as my room. The dining room light was still on. The hallway wasn't pitch black. Whatever it was, did not care. I stared at my open doorway. My vision started to blur at the edges from fear. The room felt warped, distorted. I couldn't look at the doorway anymore. I pulled the blankets over my head. And that's when I heard scratching. It was inside my room, slow, dragging, deliberate. I knew exactly where it was coming from. My grandpa's gun case in the corner. A wooden cabinet with a glass door. The scratching moved down the front of it in long strokes. I could hear the faint vibration of the glass shifting in its frame with each scrape. It wasn't random. It wasn't a mouse. It sounded like fingernails. I tried to scream. Nothing came out at first. Then I forced air into my lungs and let out the loudest scream I have ever made in my life. Within seconds, I heard real footsteps, fast, heavy, human, running down the hall. My grandpa burst into the room and flipped on the light. Everything stopped instantly, the scratching, the presence, the feeling. Gone. He checked the gun case, the hallway, upstairs. Nothing. He told me it was a nightmare. Old house noises and overactive imagination. I knew it wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep in the bed again. I draped a sheet over the side of it so I wouldn't have to see the room, then crawled underneath. I wrapped myself in blankets, put on noise-canceling headphones, and turned my back to the door. If something was in there, I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to see it. The next morning at breakfast, my grandpa casually told my grandma what had happened, using that tone adults use when they think a teenager spooked themselves. I expected her to agree. Instead, she paused and said, almost offhandedly, "That's funny. Your cousin woke me up last time she stayed here. She said she heard footsteps too." The room went quiet. It wasn't just me. Since that first night, I have heard the footsteps every single time I stay there, every visit, twice a night. They walk from one side of that upstairs room to the other, slow, casual, like they belong there. I haven't heard them come down the stairs again, and I don't know what I would do if I did. I'm 23 now. I don't fit under the bed anymore, so I sleep on top of it. But I have rules. I always sleep with my back to the door. I always wear headphones. I always play something loud enough to drown out the sound of footsteps above me, because I would rather not know if it decides to come downstairs again. I would rather pretend that I am alone in that room. And sometimes, ignorance feels safer than answers. This happened in the late 1970s, back when the world felt different. Before cell phones, before GPS, before most people thought twice about getting into a stranger's car. My uncle was a medical student at the University of Chicago, deep in the grind of lectures, exams, and sleepless nights. He lived up in Lincoln Park and commuted back and forth to campus, constantly tired and constantly broke, like most med students. One cold afternoon, after a long morning class, he stepped out onto the sidewalk and did the math in his head. He had just enough money for a taxi home, but barely. Public transportation would take forever, so he did what many young people did back then without a second thought. He stuck out his thumb. After a few minutes in the wind, a car pulled over. It was a Plymouth Satellite. Clean, ordinary, nothing flashy. The driver leaned across and rolled down the window. He looked normal, heavy-set, friendly face. the kind of man you wouldn't think twice about passing on the street. He smiled warmly and asked where my uncle was headed. "Lincoln Park," my uncle said. "No problem," the man replied easily. "I'm heading that way." Relief washed over him. He climbed in. At first, everything felt fine. The heater hummed. The car smelled faintly of cologne and old upholstery. They made small talk. About school, about medicine. The man seemed genuinely interested, nodding and smiling at the right moments. He came across as harmless. Maybe a little chatty, but harmless. They merged onto Lakeshore Drive. And then something felt off. My uncle knew that route well. If they were heading north toward Lincoln Park, the lake should have been positioned a certain way outside the passenger window. But the landmarks didn't match up. The angle of the shoreline felt wrong. He checked the signs flashing by. They were heading south. At first, he assumed it was a mistake. He cleared his throat and said lightly, "Hey, I think we're going the wrong way. I need to head north." The shift in atmosphere was instant. The warmth in the car vanished. The man didn't apologize, didn't look confused, didn't slow down. Instead, he removed his right hand from the steering wheel and placed it firmly on my uncle's knee. It wasn't friendly. It was possessive. He turned his head slowly, the smile gone. His eyes were flat, empty, and in a calm, controlled voice, he said, "No, son, you are coming with me." Everything inside my uncle froze. Yeah, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a wrong turn. This was deliberate. They were speeding down the highway. Jumping out at that speed would mean serious injury, maybe death. But staying in that car meant something far worse. Traffic began to build up near the South Shore area. Brake lights flared ahead. The car slowed, 60, 40, 20 miles per hour, bumper to bumper. This was the only chance. Without thinking, my uncle jerked his knee free, reached down, pulled up the lock, and yanked the door handle. The door opened. Cold air flooded in. He threw himself out of the moving car. He hit the pavement hard, scrambled up, and ran without looking back. He didn't care about his bag, his books, his coat. He ran across lanes of traffic, dodging honking cars, until he found a phone booth and called a friend. He never reported it. In those days, he thought it was just some creep. He was alive. That was enough. Life moved on. A year or two later, he was sitting in a cafe with the woman who would become my aunt. They were laughing, talking about the future. There was a small TV in the corner playing the news. He glanced up casually, and his blood ran cold. On the screen was the same man, the friendly face, the heavy-set build, the dead eyes. The volume was turned up. The name came through the speakers, John Wayne Gacy. The news was detailing the discovery of bodies beneath his house. Young men, hitchhikers, students, lured with charm and normalcy. Over 30 victims. My uncle couldn't breathe. Then came the detail that made his stomach drop completely. The investigators revealed that Gacy had modified the passenger side doors in his vehicles. He had removed the interior handles so victims couldn't escape once inside. My uncle remembered the click of the lock, the feel of the handle in his hand, the door swinging open. For whatever reason, different car, incomplete modification, mechanical flaw, that handle had been there that day. If it hadn't been, he would have disappeared. He would have been another missing face on a poster, another body under floorboards. He sat in that cafe shaking, realizing he had been inches away from becoming part of one of the most horrifying crime stories in American history. It wasn't bravery that saved him. It wasn't strength. It was a working door handle. And to this day, whenever he hears that name, he doesn't just think of headlines. He feels the phantom weight of a hand pressing down on his knee and hears that cold voice saying, "You are coming with me."